Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be exploring an interesting connection between a hormone called ADH.
All right.
It's an antidiuretic hormone,
Yeah.
also known as vasopressin,
Right.
and Meniere's disease.
Okay.
It's a condition that affects the inner ear.
Yes.
And we've got a whole bunch of research articles here, and I'm really curious to dig into what the science has to say about this link.
Yeah. Meniere's disease can be really tough to deal with, with the vertigo attacks and the hearing loss and the tinnitus and the feeling of fullness in your ear.
Yeah,
It can really impact people's lives in a big way.
for sure.
So we'll be looking into what the current research tells us about how ADH might actually be involved in all of this.
It's kind of a medical mystery.
It is a bit of a puzzle. Yeah.
But if we can understand the role of ADH,
Mm-hmm.
it might totally change how we think about and treat Meniere's.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What does ADH actually do in the body?
Well, ADH is mainly known for keeping our water balance in check.
Okay,
It works with the kidneys to help you hold on to water when you need to.
makes sense.
But the interesting thing is that researchers have found these ADH receptors in the inner ear as well,
Wow.
specifically in a structure called the endolymphatic sac.
Okay, endolymphatic sac.
Yeah,
That sounds a little technical.
it is.
Can you break that down a bit for us?
Sure.
What does that even mean?
So the inner ear is a super complex system
Yeah.
with all these tiny structures that are responsible for both our hearing and our balance.
Okay,
The endolymphatic sac is one of those structures,
right.
and it helps regulate the fluid levels inside the inner ear.
Oh, so like a tiny reservoir.
Yeah, exactly, like a tiny reservoir.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got this hormone ADH that regulates water balance in the kidneys.
Uh-huh.
We also know that there are ADH receptors in the inner ear.
Yeah.
So what's the connection to Meniere's disease then?
Well, there have been several research studies that have found that people with Meniere's disease tend to have higher levels of ADH,
Really?
especially during those really tough vertigo attacks.
Wow.
And there was one study that even suggested that having high levels of ADH during an attack could actually predict a more difficult course of the disease.
Oh, so that means if you have high ADH levels during an attack,
Yeah,
it might mean that it's harder to manage long term.
it could. Yeah,
That's kind of a big deal.
it is a pretty significant finding.
It really makes you wonder if ADH is more than just a bystander in all of this.
Right.
Like, could it actually be contributing to Meniere's somehow?
That's exactly what researchers are trying to figure out, and
Yeah.
this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
One of the key characteristics of Meniere's disease is something called endolymphatic hydrops.
Endolymphatic hydrops.
Yeah, basically it's a buildup of fluid in the inner ear.
Okay.
And some researchers believe that ADH might be involved in causing this fluid buildup.
Hold on. I just want to make sure I'm getting this right.
Sure.
So Meniere's disease involves a buildup of fluid in the inner ear
Yeah.
and this hormone ADH,
Yeah.
which regulates water balance,
Uh-huh.
could actually be playing a role in that fluid buildup.
That's the current thinking, yeah.
Okay.
You remember those ADH receptors we talked about in the endolymphatic sac?
Yes.
Well, some scientists believe that ADH might be acting on those receptors
Okay.
and causing the sac to essentially overfill with fluid.
Oh, wow.
And then this extra fluid kind of puts pressure on these other delicate structures in the inner ear,
Yeah,
which then leads to the symptoms of Meniere's disease.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
But how do we know this isn't just a theory?
right.
Is there actual evidence that supports the idea that ADH can really cause these problems in the inner ear?
That's a great question. And this is where animal studies become super important.
Okay.
Researchers have done studies where they give vasopressin.
Vasopressin.
Remember, that's another name for ADH.
Right.
They give it to animals over a long period of time.
Okay.
And what they've found is that this prolonged exposure to vasopressin can actually cause endolymphatic hydrops,
Wow.
which is basically mimicking what we see in humans with Meniere's disease.
So it's not just an association.
Right.
There's a real cause and effect relationship happening here.
Exactly.
That's pretty compelling evidence.
It is.
Does that mean that managing ADH levels could be a potential new way to treat Meniere's?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something that researchers are definitely looking into.
Okay.
There are some really interesting possibilities coming out of the research.
Like what?
Well, one study, for example, looked at different things that can naturally lower ADH levels.
Okay.
Things like drinking plenty of water,
Okay.
using tympanic ventilation tubes.
Tympanic ventilation tubes.
Yeah, those are tiny little tubes that are placed in the eardrum.
Got it.
And even something as simple as sleeping in complete darkness.
Wait, sleeping in darkness can actually lower your ADH level.
It can, yeah.
How does that even work?
Our bodies have this natural 24-hour rhythm
Right.
called a circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
That influences our hormone production, including ADH.
Nope.
Exposure to light, especially at night, can mess with this rhythm.
Interesting.
So sleeping in darkness helps to keep that rhythm more regular,
Okay.
which could then help keep your ADH levels more stable as well.
I'm starting to see how it all connects.
Yeah.
But what about the results of this study?
Yeah.
Did these interventions actually help people with Meniere's? Meniere's?
They did in some cases.
Wow.
The study found that for some people with Meniere's, these simple interventions actually helped to control their vertigo
Really?
and even led to improvements in their hearing.
That's amazing.
It's still early research, but it definitely opens up a new way of thinking about how we can approach this condition.
So instead of just masking the symptoms,
Yeah.
we might be able to address a potential root cause.
Exactly. That's the hope.
This is getting really interesting.
It is.
What else can you tell us about this connection between ADH and Meniere's?
Well, let's dive a little deeper into the research on stress and ADH. Because for a long time, people thought that stress was a major trigger for Meniere's attacks.
Right.
The idea was that stress would increase ADH,
Okay.
and then that would lead to an attack.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But some of the studies we looked at didn't actually find a direct link
Oh, really?
between everyday stress levels and ADH levels in people with Meniere's.
So that means that everyday stress might not be the direct trigger we thought it was.
It might not be the whole story, no.
So what else could be going on?
Well, there is evidence suggesting that a sudden intense stress response could play a role. It's like
Okay.
when your body goes into that fight or flight mode,
Yeah,
your heart races, your breathing gets faster,
right.
and your body releases a bunch of hormones,
Uh-huh.
including ADH.
Wow, so it's like your body's trying to conserve water in
Exactly.
case of an emergency,
Yeah, it's like a built-in survival mechanism.
even if the threat isn't a physical one.
Exactly.
So if a sudden stress response can trigger this surge in ADH,
Yeah.
could that then disrupt the fluid balance in the inner ear?
Potentially, yes.
Especially if there's someone who's already prone to Meniere's.
That's the idea.
Okay, so that sudden burst of ADH
Yeah,
could kind of tip the scales,
it could.
especially if you're already dealing with fluid regulation issues in your inner ear.
Right.
It's also fascinating.
It is.
But it also makes Meniere's seem even more complex.
It's definitely a complex condition.
Yeah, if it's not just everyday stress,
Uh-huh.
and there's this whole interplay of hormones
Yeah.
and maybe even genetics,
Right.
what does it all mean for people who are trying to manage this condition?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that researchers are working hard to answer. It's
Okay.
not a simple answer, unfortunately.
I can imagine.
But that's what makes the research so exciting, because
Okay.
we are learning more all the time. Remember
Yeah.
those interventions we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the drinking water,
Uh-huh.
the tympanic ventilation tubes,
Yeah.
and the sleeping in darkness.
Exactly.
Those things that can naturally lower ADH levels?
Right.
It sounds promising,
It does.
but are they really enough to make a difference for someone who's dealing with Meniere's?
Well, they might not be a cure-all.
Right.
And they might not work for everyone.
Yeah.
But they do offer a good starting point
Okay.
for managing Meniere's.
Oh, okay.
It's about taking a more comprehensive approach.
So it's not just about medications and masking the symptoms.
Right.
It's about looking at potential root causes
Exactly.
and making lifestyle changes that actually support inner ear health.
That's the key.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's about creating an environment where the inner ear is less vulnerable to those fluctuations in ADH.
So by addressing those potential triggers,
Uh-huh.
managing fluid balance,
Yeah,
and considering those lifestyle changes,
exactly.
we can potentially make a real difference for people with Meniere's.
That's the hope.
This deep dive has been eye-opening.
It has been fascinating.
It's not just about vertigo attacks.
Right.
It's about this whole web of factors
Yeah.
that contribute to Meniere's.
It's complex.
Yeah, and the research is ongoing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Scientists are still trying to figure out all the mysteries of ADH
Yeah.
and its role in Meniere's.
For sure, we're learning more every day.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, there's a lot of really exciting research happening right now.
Before we move on, though,
Okay.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
You said that one study found a potential link between high ADH levels during a Meniere's attack
Yeah.
and a potentially more difficult course of the disease.
Huh.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, of course.
What does that actually mean for someone who's experiencing those attacks?
Well, basically, it suggests that if your ADH levels are really high during an attack,
Yeah.
you might be more likely to have more frequent or severe symptoms over time.
Oh, wow.
It's like your body's having a stronger reaction,
Right.
which could then lead to more disruption in the inner ear.
So it's like a red flag.
It could be, yeah.
That the condition could be harder to manage,
It's something to pay attention to.
but it's not a guarantee.
Right, not a guarantee, no.
Okay.
Everyone's experience with Meniere's is unique.
Of course.
And there are so many factors that can influence how the disease progresses.
Right.
So it's just one piece of the puzzle.
One piece of a very complex puzzle.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has been incredible.
It has been fascinating.
We've gone from this, mysterious hormone
Yeah.
to fluid buildup in the inner ear
Right.
to genetics.
It's all connected.
Yeah. And lifestyle changes.
Uh-huh.
It's amazing how much we've learned about the factors that contribute to Meniere's disease.
It really is.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to shift gears just a little bit
Sure.
and talk about those aquaporins we mentioned earlier.
Yes, those are important.
I remember you saying that There are these tiny water channels in our cells
Uh-huh.
that help move water in and out,
Right.
and that ADH plays a role in regulating them.
Ex
But how do aquaporins fit into this whole picture of ADH and Meniere's?
That's a great question.
Are they just another piece of the puzzle?
Well, they're definitely a key piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Because research suggests that variations in certain aquaporin genes
Okay.
might be connected to a person's susceptibility to developing Meniere's.
Wait, so our genes could actually make us more or less sensitive to the effects of ADH?
It's possible, yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty big concept.
It is.
It really makes you think about how our genes and our environment might be working together
Yeah.
to create the perfect storm for Meniere's.
Exactly. It's a complex interplay of factors.
So it sounds like we're on the verge of some major breakthroughs
We could be, yeah.
in understanding and treating Meniere's.
The research is very promising.
Are there any specific aquaporin genes that scientists are focusing on?
There are a few that have caught their attention.
Okay.
But the research is still ongoing.
Of course.
They're trying to figure out exactly how these gene variations affect water regulation in the inner ear and how all of this relates to ADH.
It sounds like a really complex puzzle.
It is a bit like solving a puzzle.
Yeah, but with each piece we find,
Uh-huh.
we get closer to the complete picture.
Exactly.
It sounds like there's a lot of promising research on the horizon for Meniere's.
There is,
But in the meantime, what can people do to manage their symptoms?
right?
And maybe even minimize the impact of ADH?
Well, those thought style changes we talked about are a good place to start.
Right, the drinking water and the salt and all that.
Yeah, remember, one of the key takeaways here is that ADH plays a big role in regulating fluid balance,
Uh-huh,
and a high ADH levels could be contributing to that endolymphatic hydrops.
right.
So anything that helps to keep those ADH levels stable could potentially be helpful.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about making huge changes to your life.
Okay.
It's about making small adjustments that can make a big difference over time.
Like what kind of small adjustments?
Well, first and foremost, stay hydrated.
Mm-hmm.
Drinking plenty of water throughout the day can help to dilute your blood
Okay,
and prevent your body from releasing too much ADH.
got it.
Another simple but effective strategy is managing your salt intake.
Salt intake. Okay.
High salt diets can actually make your body hold on to more water.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which then increases your blood volume
Okay.
and stimulates ADH release.
So it's not just about what we drink.
Yeah,
It's about what we eat as well.
exactly. It's all connected.
It really is all connected.
Our diets play a huge role in our overall health,
Yeah.
and that includes the health of our inner ears.
Makes sense.
Some people with Meniere's also find that limiting caffeine and alcohol can help manage their symptoms as well.
Caffeine and alcohol.
Yeah,
Really?
it's because they act as diuretics.
Diuretics.
Yeah, that make you urinate more frequently.
Right.
Which can then lead to dehydration
Uh-huh.
and potentially trigger the release of more ADH.
So again, it's all about maintaining that delicate fluid balance.
Exactly.
Wow, this deep dive has given us so much to think about.
It has been a fascinating discussion.
We've really uncovered a whole new way of understanding Meniere's disease.
I think so too.
It's not just about the symptoms.
Right.
It's about the underlying mechanisms
Yeah,
and the complex ways our bodies work.
absolutely.
I agree. And by exploring this connection between ADH and Meniere's,
Uh-huh.
we've opened up a whole world of possibilities
Yeah,
for managing this complex condition.
for sure.
It's not just about treating the symptoms.
Right.
It's about understanding the root causes
Exactly.
and finding ways to address them.
That's the goal.
So for anyone listening who's dealing with Meniere's,
Uh-huh.
what's the one thing you want them to take away from this deep dive?
That's a great question.
What's the most important message?
Well, I think the most important message is that knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, by understanding the role of ADH,
Uh-huh.
you can start making more informed choices about your lifestyle
Okay.
and potentially minimize its impact on your inner ear health.
So it's about taking control.
In a way, yes.
And don't be afraid to talk to your doctor
Oh, absolutely.
about the latest research,
Definitely.
because there are always new discoveries
Yeah,
and new treatment options emerging.
all the time.
It's like you said earlier, it's about taking a more holistic approach,
Right.
looking at the whole picture,
The whole person.
not just treating the symptoms in isolation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And hopefully it's given our listeners a new perspective on Meniere's disease.
I hope so.
This whole conversation has been incredibly insightful.
It has.
We've gone from this, seemingly simple hormone
Right.
to fluid buildup in the inner ear
Yeah.
to genetic variations
Uh-huh.
and lifestyle changes.
It's fascinating how it's all connected.
It really is.
And one thing that really stands out to me is how even small changes can make a big impact.
Yeah.
Something as simple as staying hydrated.
Yeah.
Managing your salt intake
Right.
and getting enough sleep in a dark environment
Yeah.
can potentially make a significant difference.
It's a powerful reminder that we have more control over our health
We do.
than we sometimes think.
Absolutely.
And that knowledge can be really empowering.
It can.
I couldn't agree more.
And as research continues, I'm excited to see what the future holds for Meniere's treatment and management.
Me too. This has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
We've learned so much about ADH and its connection to Meniere's disease.
We have.
But what I find most hopeful is that this is an area of active research, and scientists are constantly making new discoveries.
Yeah, they are.
Who knows what breakthroughs are just around the corner?
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure having you here,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.